We are a narrative people. We love stories. And that's one reason why I think that the Bible is full of stories. I also think about being a member in a congregation. Some of my favorite times are when people go up and share their testimonies, not just of salvation, but just of what God is doing in their life. It is so convicting and encouraging to hear about the unique ways that God is using their lives to make His name great. And I think that historical theology can affect us similarly. By studying the development of Christian doctrine and tradition through the lens of individuals who have lived and fought for it, we are encouraged and convicted by their stories. We should study historical theology because it confirms our faith, bolsters our hope, and spurs us to action. There are many reasons why we should study historical theology, but I covered these particular two in my essay. The first one that I mentioned is that God tells us to. He sets a precedent for His people of looking back on the past in remembrance. I talked about how the Passover is set to remember God's deeds of the Exodus and bringing His people out of Egypt. Talked about Purim and how it was a way to remember how God delivered Israel during the time of Esther. Historical theology allows us to look upon God's powerful and providential care in preserving His people and His gospel. I also mentioned Psalm 77:11, which says, "I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your wonders of old." Historical theology allows us to look back at God's wonders in the past. Another reason why I think we should study historical theology is to understand error. The church has both made mistakes and fought to correct those mistakes. Present-day Christians are guided by the theologians of the past. So whether we are confronting issues over soteriology, Christology, ecclesiology, eschatology, all of the ologies, we can see how godly men and women have dealt with these topics in a biblical way, and we can use them as a guide to help us as we navigate those topics as well, particularly in churches where there can be division, and we want to see what Scripture has taught us and see what tradition has been established in the past by those who are trying to live according to the Bible. So I think that church ministry is enhanced by studying historical theology. I named several examples. One was Irenaeus. It was so amazing getting to read his book on apostolic preaching and just seeing how he was faithful to point out meticulously all the ways that God fulfilled His promises of the coming Messiah in the person of Christ. By studying Irenaeus' life and ministry, and studying that book in particular, our biblical theology is refreshed as well. I also talked about Gresham Machen, I don't know how to say it, standing against the social gospel, being bold when people were cheapening the grace of God and making light of sin. Also think about people like George Mueller, who lived by incredible faith, or by Jim Elliot, who was willing to count as rubbish everything for the sake of the gospel and living sacrificially to proclaim the good news. So I think that believers today are incredibly benefited by these men and women. We talk about in the book, but today's theology is tomorrow's historical theology. So our theology has been molded and defined by those who have preceded us, and we now have a part to play in shaping the future generations. We are all part of one story, God's story, and so we should be able to benefit from the ways that God has worked throughout history.